All right, man. Peace. Brothers, I did a video a while ago called Self-Awareness is Key, Volume 1, starring Dak Prescott. And the purpose of that series is to illustrate how important it is to always understand who you are and what your place is in whatever convention you're currently set up in or immersed in, whether it be a career as a chef or as a professional athlete or working in IT, so on and so forth. When people see that you understand what your place is there and you have a pathway that you establish for yourself for success, they're going to respect you a lot more than when you come into a new environment with a delusional mentality, no matter how successful you've been, where you came from. And that's the main issue that I see with Mr. Chris Paul, currently the starting point guard of the Houston Rockets. The reason why he goes from team to team and the atmosphere becomes toxic is because he does not understand who he is. Chris Paul, in his mind, thinks that he's Kobe Bryant, like he's won 2 championships, and he therefore can bark at other players and they're supposed to bow down to him. He believes that he's Isaiah Thomas. Chris Paul is not even John Stockton. And that brings me to my next point. In the NBA, as a little man, no matter how talented you are, there are pretty much 3 pathways for you. You can either take the Isaiah Thomas route and lead a team to multiple championships, which thus far only Isaiah Thomas has done as a real legitimate little man, because Steph Curry is kind of on that boundary between being a little man and a wing. You can go the John Stockton route and have a very successful career, have great stats, but never win. John Stockton is at least one level above Chris Paul when it comes to the overall NBA hierarchy. Just based on conditioning level, fitness, basketball IQ, stats, and success in the playoffs, John Stockton is at least one level above Chris Paul. Chris Paul has never been able to lead his team to the conference finals. John Stockton did that multiple times. John Stockton made 2 NBA Finals appearances where they gave the Chicago Bulls their greatest run. That Utah Jazz team in the late 90s was a championship level team. Of course, 20 years later, you have, a lot of the new age basketball fans who believe that the Utah Jazz were not particularly talented. They have no idea what they're talking about. The Utah Jazz team was a team filled with older veterans in their early to mid 30s who were widely avoided by many of the more prominent and talented teams in the NBA throughout the late 90s, early 2000s, even into the 2000-2001 season. Phil Jackson was on record as stating that he wanted his team, that Shaq and Kobe LA Lakers three-peat team, to avoid the Utah Jazz because he understood that their basketball IQ was still so high that they would be a threat to that first three-peat LA Laker team. Because, not to digress, but as I've stated in the past, that Kobe Shaq LA Laker three-peat team had the lowest basketball IQ of any great team in the history of the NBA. But just to get back to the point, CP3 is heading towards that third option. As I've already stated, there are 3 options for a great little man in the history of the NBA. That being the Isaiah Thomas championship route, the John Stockton stat route, or the third route, which is the Gary Payton route. Maybe you'll become a backup player on a team that has championship aspirations, which is how Gary Payton's career ended. It's how Steve Nash's career ended. It's how Jason Kidd's career ended. And once again, Gary Payton and Jason Kidd, they're right there at the barrier of being considered a little man because they're both about 6'3", 6'4". Point being is this: Chris Paul plays their position, and he does not understand who he is as a player at this point in his career. You just can't keep going around being overly confrontational or denigrating to the actual star of the team, which by all reports he has been towards James Harden, talking about his man breasts. He's going to find himself asked out. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Despite a summer of uncertainty, the Rockets are saying, Houston, we have no problem in regards to Chris Paul.
Because they have no choice. When CP3 states that he never demanded a trade, what he means is that it does not do him any good to admit that he wanted to be traded to the LA Lakers. But there was no way in the world that that trade was ever going to happen because the Lakers needed to save all their assets to acquire Anthony Davis. And they're not willing to trade anything to acquire a Chris Paul, a player who they wanted back in 2012, and is nowhere near the player that he was. CP3 is trying to hitch his wagon to LeBron's star if he can, but he can't admit that. It's just not going to happen. He's going to have to make this bet and lie in it and put forth his best effort. To be quite honest with you, I expected this type of blow up between James Harden and CP3 from their first season together, because I never thought that they were going to mesh well. I'm surprised that it's taken this long for their rapport to dissolve. It's almost like if you were trapped on a deserted island with a woman that you don't particularly like and who also does not particularly like you. After a certain amount of time, y'all gonna do some things. Y'all gonna do some things with one another. Madonna did a film similar to that, or pretty much in that vein, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, that was directed by her husband at the time, Guy Ritchie, in which she played this spoiled socialite who was on a yacht or was on some type of luxury cruise ship with other rich people. And one of the crew members was an Italian man who she did not like and therefore did not like her. They were deserted on an island and eventually fell in love. James Harden is so stupid. This dude dunks a basketball and he's worried about acting as if he hit his nose on the rim. That's why he can't win shit.
I think there's a fundamental tension between the way Chris Paul likes to play basketball and James Harden does. And I'm
not quite sure about that. I actually think that there are some fundamental similarities. That's why they don't mesh well. Because Chris Paul wants to dominate the basketball. He wants to be the proverbial Steve Nash in that Mike D'Antoni system. And he knows that James Harden has carte blanche to do whatever the hell he wants to do. James Harden might have the greenest light of any player that I've ever seen. Right up there with Allen Iverson circa 2000, 2001. Maybe Kobe circa 2006. Like, his green light is off the charts, man. So that's one of the main reasons why Chris Paul is so upset.
And guess what? You don't know their choice.
There's another reason why Chris Paul can't win anything. He's overly obsessed with trolling the referees and being overtly disrespectful. For no reason whatsoever.
Your contract is so obtuse, it's really hard to move it. Now, do I think he ends up...
Look at that silly shit. Now, why would you get in the referee's face and do all that? Do you think that that's going to get you any calls down the stretch of games? And that's another thing. That's another essential difference between Chris Paul and John Stockton. John Stockton was great in the clutch. CP3 has very obvious anxiety issues because he spends too much time trying to act as if he's a better player than he actually is. So that puts an extra amount of pressure within his own mind on himself. He has issues relaxing, and it comes out in how he treats people.
You, Tracy McGrady, Kobe Bryant, all saying, hey, the way that team is set up, the way they have been playing the last couple of seasons, it is successful basketball in the regular season. It's not championship basketball once you get to the postseason.
And T-Mac and Kobe would know because T-Mac is another player who had an extremely green light in the early 2000s, and he never won shit.
The reports have been that Chris Paul has been saying some of the same things internally. But do you feel like they can work it out enough that they really can get to a point where they play differently enough in the playoffs to win?
No, they cannot work it out. Because at the end of the day, if Daryl Morey and or Mike D'Antoni do not have the courage to express or exert a certain amount of authority over the entire situation, it's going to be left up to Chris Paul and James Harden to iron things out, and that's very difficult to do. Sometimes you need an arbiter. And Mike D'Antoni does not have the courage to act as an arbiter over this situation. Mike D'Antoni needs to call a meeting between himself, Chris Paul, and James Harden in the office and get down to the nitty-gritty. One of the main issues is that the Houston Rockets do not run a real offense. So because they don't run a real offense, whichever player on the floor is allowed to act as the captain of that bullshit that they run, eventually is going to become the focus of the ire of his teammates. And if Mike D'Antoni does not understand that, then that means that he's not a good leader.
I think they can work it out. I mean, now that the Golden State Warriors are out of the way, maybe that style of play can work, and maybe they can continue to play with it. But again, in the playoffs, teams are going to make adjustments, and if you can't adjust to that, then you're going to fail. And
so I don't consider the Houston Rockets to be the second best team in the NBA. Arguably, they could be the second best team in the Western Conference. I would like to see a series between them and the LA Lakers, because between LeBron and AD has very little experience winning in the playoffs, and LeBron has not won anything in 3 going on 4 years. And the one championship that he did win in the last 4 years, he needed a lot of dominoes to fall his way. So that would be a very interesting series between the Lakers and the Houston Rockets.
What a good team or a great team like Golden State was able to do for a couple of years in a row. So they have to change a little bit of their style of play. James Harden individual performances are great in the regular season, but that's not playoff basketball.
Yeah.
Hopefully Chris Paul will be able to communicate with someone, whether it's his wife, Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James, who may be able to build a bridge with him and open up his mind to the importance of self-awareness and decorum. which are not attributes that he has displayed thus far in his NBA career, and I think that has held him back. So peace.